This is Stories from Palestine podcast. My name is Crystal and I live with my Palestinian husband and 2 children in Beit Safafa between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. I studied the tour guide program at the Bethlehem Bible College and I recently graduated. Listen to weekly new episodes about the history, cultural heritage and reality of life in Palestine. Hi everyone and welcome back to Stories from Palestine with this summer short episodes because I am in the Netherlands with my children and I do not have that much time to do interviews and editing. So today's summer short episode is about Handala, that little boy with a few short hairs on his head, depicted on his back with his hands clasped behind, a symbol of the Palestinian refugees, waiting for justice and waiting for their return. And if you don't know this cartoon, then check out the cover art for this podcast episode or go to the website storiesfrompalestine.info or the Facebook or Instagram account and you can see who I am talking about. I'm recording this episode on the 22nd of July, 2021, and today it is exactly 34 years ago that Naji al Ali, the cartoonist who created Handala, was assassinated in London. So on the 22nd of July, 1987. And I want to share with you something about Handala and about his creator, Naji al Ali. First of all, the name of this little boy, this cartoon boy, a very simple cartoon, by the way, basically just a few lines drawn on paper, is Handala. And Naji al Ali chose this name for a reason. The name comes from a plant that grows in the area of Palestine, especially in the dry areas, and it's called Handal in Arabic. The Latin name for it is Citrullus colocynthis. This is for the botanists among us. It's a plant that produces a fruit that tastes very bitter. And this bitterness symbolizes the pain and the sorrow of the Palestinian refugees who were displaced in 1948. And they lost not only their properties and their lands and their homes, but in a way also their future because they did not have anything to give to forward on to the next generation. This plant, the plant with the bitter fruit, has very deep roots. And even when you cut it very deep, it usually grows back. So this is also very symbolic for the Palestinians who keep struggling and who are waiting and hoping for justice and for return. And they are rooted in the land, just like this Handal, this plant, is rooted deeply in the land. The first time that Naji al Ali made a cartoon of this little boy, of Handala, was in 1969. It first appeared in a Kuwaiti newspaper called Al Siyasa newspaper. And at first, in the first years, Naji al Ali used to draw him with his face towards the viewers, so he was facing the audience. But in 1973, when Naji al Ali became so disappointed with the normalization of the Americans and the Arab world with Israel, he started drawing Handala with his back towards the viewers. And Naji al Ali said that by turning his back towards the audience, he showed, and I quote, his rejection at a time when solutions are presented to us the American way, and as a symbol of rejection of all the present negative tides in our region. I have also heard Palestinian refugees explain that we are looking with Handala over his shoulders towards Palestine, while everybody is turning his back to Palestine and looking away from the problems there. We are looking with Handala towards Palestine. Naji al Ali himself said that Handala is a 10-year-old boy and that he will remain 10 years old until he will be able to return to Palestine. And Naji al Ali was forced himself to leave his hometown, Ashajara, in the north of Palestine in 1948, when he was a 10-year-old boy himself. So the cartoonist made this little boy, this Handala, look like a very simple boy. He's wearing very simple clothes and he is depicted always barefoot. He wanted to symbolize his allegiance to the poor people, to the refugees. And this is what Naji al Ali said about Handala himself. He said, the character of Handala was sort of icon that protected my soul from falling whenever I felt sluggish or I was ignoring my duty. That child was like a splash of fresh water on my forehead, bringing me to attention and keeping me from error and loss. He was the arrow of the compass, pointing steadily towards Palestine. Not just Palestine in geographical terms, but Palestine in its humanitarian sense, the symbol of a just cause, whether it is located in Egypt, Vietnam, or South Africa. I am from Ain al-Hilwa, a camp like any other camp. The people of the camps were the people of the land in Palestine. They were not merchants or landowners, they were farmers. When they lost their land, they lost their lives. The bourgeoisie never had to live in the camps, whose inhabitants were exposed to hunger, to every degradation, and to every form of oppression. Entire families died in our camps. Those are the Palestinians who remain in my mind, even when my work takes me away from the camp. In 1959, the cartoonist Naji al Ali joined the Arab nationalist movement. This movement was established back in 1952 by George Habash, and it was focused on Arab unity and social progress. So it was a more secular and a more socialist movement. And Naji al Ali started to make political cartoons, and these cartoons tackled a number of political topics. They also criticized not only Israel and the United States, but also Arab leaders. And the first time that his cartoons were published was actually by Ghassan Kanafani in the Al Hurriya newspaper. And Ghassan Kanafani is a very famous Palestinian author. He was also one of the leaders of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP. He was assassinated in 1972 by the Mossad. The cartoons of Naji al Ali were very simple, and they were also easy to understand. They were in black and white, no color, and the topics would range from social injustice, the absence of democracy, the absence of the freedom of expression, human rights issues, and also political issues. He did not only use the character of Handala, there are several other characters that return in his cartoons, especially 3 other characters. There is Fatima, and Fatima represents the mother and the land. She's a woman who stands side by side with the men in the struggle for freedom and democracy. You often see her wearing around her neck the key of the house, the symbol of the refugees that want to return to the homes that they had to leave in 1948. It's a very important symbol that represents the struggle for the Palestinian refugees. Another important character that we see in his cartoons is that of the good man. He is drawn with sharp lines, with clear features. He's an Arab man, a Palestinian man, poor, thin, a refugee, but also a freedom fighter. And then there is the evil man. And the evil man is represented as a fat guy without clear features, and we don't see his legs. And this symbolizes that he has no popular support. This evil man represents all the betrayal and the plot against the resistance and generally evil, the character that represents the oppression. And this oppression could be in general by the establishment, by the Arab regimes, by the United States, Israel. He criticized them all. In the cartoons of Naji al Ali, there is a lot of symbolism. You will recognize that he often uses the kufiya, which is the black and white shawl that became very known, especially after Yasser Arafat wore it always in public. He uses the folkloric dress, the thobe, and the Palestinian embroidery, the tatris. And other symbols are obviously the Palestinian flag, the map of Palestine, but also we see regularly the use of the cross and even the image of Jesus. We see people carrying a cross. We even see crucifixion. All of this symbolizing the suffering of the Palestinian people. On many of his cartoons, there is also text written in Arabic, and this is text that clarifies or gives a message to the reader. He made over 40,000 drawings, and Naji al Ali published 3 books with collection of cartoons. He was working on a 4th book when he was assassinated on the 22nd of July 1987, while he was working in London. He was working there for a Kuwaiti newspaper for which he drew political caricatures. He was shot and died 5 weeks later after having been in a coma, and it's still not clear who killed him and why, although there are many theories about that. But for sure he had enemies because he was critical and he was very influential. Naji al Ali said about Handala, "This character was born to survive. I will continue with him even after I die." And that is very true, because until today we see Handala depicted everywhere in Palestine. Murals, graffitis, we see him on keychains, on jewelry. I saw people who had a Handala tattooed on their arms or on their legs. And even around the globe, when people protest and demonstrate for Palestine, they use Handala as a symbol of the right of return for the Palestinian people. I will include in the show notes of this short podcast episode some links where you can read a bit more about Handala and about Naji al Ali, and I will also upload some pictures and some cartoons on my website, storiesfrompalestine.info. Click on the link in the show notes so you get straight to the correct blog entry. And thank you for listening. I hope you learned something new. If in the future the world opens again and you want to visit Palestine, please be in touch with me. And I'm sure that you will see Handala in many places that you will visit when you come to Palestine. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell others about it. That is very helpful to grow the podcast audience. You can connect on Facebook, Instagram, follow the YouTube channel, and sign up for the weekly email reminder with a link to the new podcast episode. Use the link in the show notes. You can also use that link to visit my Ko-fi page, where you can support the podcast with a donation. The podcast is free of advertisements only because of generous donations of listeners. And that's it. I hope you will tune in again next week. Are you still there? That's good, because I wanted to ask you something. On the 15th of August, Stories from Palestine podcast will have its first anniversary. It's almost a year ago that the first episode was published, and I'm planning to celebrate the first anniversary of Stories from Palestine podcast with a special episode to be released on the 15th of August. And for that episode, I would love to hear from you. Yes, from you as listener of the podcast. Every episode has between 300 to 600 listeners, with some of the episodes reached over 1,000 listeners. And it would be so interesting to know more about You, the listener. Where do you listen from? What is your connection to Palestine? How did you find out about the podcast? What was your favorite episode? What kind of episodes do you prefer to listen to? Are you more into the history episodes or the ones about the cultural heritage or the guided tours? And what are the topics you would like to hear more about in the future? Send me an email or a Facebook or Instagram message that I can read and record. And if you're up for it, I would even love to have your voice recorded. You can voice record a message, send it to me, and I can use it in that special anniversary episode. Just drop me a line and I will send you the directions on how to record and send it to me. The email address is crystal@storiesfrompalestine.info. You can find this in the show notes as well as the links to the social media accounts. I really hope that you will take a moment to participate. So please send me your messages before the 1st of August so that I have time to edit it and you can listen to that special episode from the 15th of August onwards. Thank you for being a listener of the podcast and part of this community.